Did you ever read a book or a story and thought to yourself, wow, this character kind of sucks? Maybe you've even reread your own stories and noticed that your characters lack something that makes them feel real. Something that makes them feel relatable and believable, like a real human being, instead of a one-dimensional, poorly developed character. Believe me, I've been there. When I started writing years ago, I faced the same problem many inexperienced writers face. The final boss, if you will. How do you create convincing and memorable characters in fiction? The quality of my first attempts of this were questionable at best. My characters acted weirdly out of character in some scenes, lacked complete personality in others, and overall just felt one-dimensional and fake. I know the struggle. But luckily I've learned some tips and tricks which I will now share with you, so you do not have to struggle as much as I did when I started. Creating compelling characters that your readers will love should be the goal, and by the end of this video, you will be able to successfully achieve this goal. There are probably 1,000 ways to start creating your characters. Sometimes you already have an idea in mind. Maybe you looked at an art piece, listened to a song, or heard a random sentence that sparked the idea of a character. You already got the first glimpse of them, and you have an idea into what they can develop. If so, great, start here and see where it's leading you to. It's also valid to start with your character's appearance. However, keep in mind that it is great if you know every single thing about your character's appearance, but it's not always needed for you to describe everything to your readers. Many people, for example, start describing their character's eye color, but let's be honest. Did you notice the eye color of every person you've ever spoken to? Especially if you have just met them? Probably not. So while appearance is a crucial part of a character, and while it's really fun to play around with that, obviously there are more things to think about while creating your characters. Let's take a look at them. Personally, I think this is one of the most fun parts of creating my characters, but I'm sure that if my characters were real people, they would absolutely despise me for what I'm doing to them. For some reason, I tend to write extremely traumatic background stories for my characters. I once created a character who was banished from his world after he was betrayed by his older brother, who he trusted wholeheartedly, while his parents were killed by said brother. Yeah, that's what I mean. Another character of mine was abandoned in a forest as a toddler because people wanted him dead. You get the gist. Obviously, you do not have to write traumatic background stories. Not at all. Your character also could have a great childhood, many friends and loving parents. That is totally fine. The important thing is that you keep in mind that your character's background story causes them to act a certain way. Did they have supportive parents who allowed them to make mistakes as a child? Your character might be more confident than others and more willing to try new things out, as well as take risks because they grew up in a household which supported their healthy confidence development. Let's take my character as an example again. He was banished from his own world and betrayed by his older brother when he was still a young child. He had to fight to stay alive. Do you think he trusts people? No. He stays away from others, doesn't build any real deep connections with other people, and lacks morals. I think you understand what I mean. Your character's background story will influence how they act, so keep this in mind while writing them, and be consistent with it. Someone who has experienced the betrayal which I described will not suddenly trust a random person. This is especially important if you want to introduce a love interest. They will not suddenly trust this other person simply because you want them to end up with each other. There has to be some serious character development before you can entertain this thought, so always keep your character's background story in mind while writing them. Character development in fiction means that the reader can observe the character changing step by step throughout the narrative. This could be a character realizing the importance of something they already had before their journey started and which they kind of dismissed before, such as family or friends, for example. A character facing their beliefs and changing them during the narrative, or many other things. You can be really creative with this one. The character development is a crucial aspect of your character and your story, but I feel that often it does not get executed properly. Do not rush the character development while writing a story. I know that the urge to do so is strong, because you as the author already know where you want your character's journey to go, but rushing it might make your character seem less authentic. Let's take a look at an example. If you have a character who has been deeply betrayed the last time they trusted someone, they will not trust others easily, even if you want them to. Their behavior will not change overnight. Depending on what your character's background story is, they can be deeply scarred, and their behavior is a way of making sure they will never experience this kind of betrayal and hurt again. So instead of rushing into a character development, make sure that there are small scenes throughout your story, in which your character slowly but surely starts to question their reservations against someone or something. And also keep in mind that just because one of your characters went on some kind of character development journey, this does not mean that other characters around them suddenly also change. Especially not if nothing really happened to them because they didn't go through the same journey. So if your character leaves home, for example, to go on some kind of journey in which they meet new people and have to face and re-evaluate their beliefs, people who did not leave with this character but stayed in the same place might not have the same character development. Why would they? Keep this in mind while writing. An important thing to keep in mind is that all of your characters should have some kind of goal and aspirations. In everyday life, we act a certain way because we have some kind of goal in mind. This can be a small goal, like if I smile and talk to them, maybe they like me. Or a bigger goal, like if I study hard for this exam, I can finally graduate university and get a job I've been dreaming about. Your characters should be the same. Whenever they say something or act a certain way, it should be clear to you and your readers why they do that. So think about the following questions. What goals, long-term and short-term, do your characters have? Why are these goals important to them? Is one goal more important to them than the other? Why? What would they be willing to do in order to achieve this goal? The last question can also help you to think more about your character's personality. Some people, for example, would be willing to sacrifice nearly anything to achieve a goal. Some might give up rather quickly. Others might not even be brave enough to try. What about your character? What would they do? And now the harder part. Once you come up with answers to these questions for your character, you should stick to them. If you decide on your character's goal and you decided that they are the kind of person to do anything to achieve it, it would just feel completely unnatural if there's a possibility for them to achieve this goal or achieve parts of this goal in the 5th chapter and they don't go for it. Of course, your character can change, but then there has to be a good explanation for it. It might help to always imagine your character as a real-life person, or maybe as yourself. Would you just randomly give up on your life goals for no reason, even when you dedicated blood, sweat and tears for it before? No? Well, then your character shouldn't either. So think about your character's short-term and long-term goals, why they are important, and how much they are willing to do for these goals. After that, write your answers down somewhere you can always find them again, and stick to the characterization you gave your characters. When you are creating characters, you want to make them as realistic and relatable as possible. In order to achieve this, they have to have strengths and weaknesses. Your character will have to fail and succeed in your story. They might struggle at some point and then overcome these struggles or learn to deal with them at a later point. This is what makes characters interesting and what makes them relatable to the reader. But how do you come up with strengths and weaknesses? Every personality trait that could be perceived as a strength can also be a weakness. I'm sure you have noticed that on yourself. Maybe you are a perfectionist. Sure, it can have its advantages. You get your work done on time and deliver the best possible quality. People tend to praise you for the great work you are delivering. But what about the disadvantages? How often did you stop something just because you weren't immediately great at it? How many times did you stress about something you were working on simply because it didn't turn out exactly how you wanted it to? How many times did you not even start something just because you were afraid of failure? I think you understand what I mean. Give your character a strength and think about how this could also be a weakness. And in what situations during a story this becomes a visible weakness. Habits and quirks can turn your character into a more memorable character, but I think you should also be a little careful with this one. If you follow me on Pinterest, you might have seen my posts about habits and quirks. There are a lot of them because it's fun to think about. Maybe your character bites their nails or lips when they are anxious or concentrated. Maybe they tend to zone out a lot while in a social setting. Maybe they always wear mismatched socks because they couldn't care less about finding the correct pair. Maybe they used to wear glasses but recently switched to contact lenses, so now they always subconsciously want to readjust their glasses, which results in them nearly poking their eyes out with their finger. The last one might have happened to me a lot while being at the gym. You see, coming up with habits and quirks can be really fun. Think about what might fit your character. But please, don't just pick a bunch of them and just throw them into your character's faces. Or you'll quickly end up with the quirky character whose whole personality is being quirky. Instead, pick maybe 2, I'd say at the most 3 of them, and also don't just repeat them every time your character is in a scene. Try to add them in a way that feels natural. And also make sure to stick to them. Most habits and quirks are things that people have for a long time, not only for a day. So if you decide to use them throughout your story, unless your character is actively trying to stop these habits. For example, if they want to stop biting their lips while anxious. But even then this might resurface in, let's say, a particularly stressful situation. There are more things you can consider while creating your characters, but I think this video gives you a good first overview on how to create intriguing and realistic characters. So now that you've managed to create the greatest characters, you have to introduce them to your readers and your other characters. I will do another video on how to introduce your characters, so subscribe if you don't want to miss out on it. Also follow me on Pinterest for more creative writing advice. See you in the next video!